Chapter 26 is our cardiovascular system. So this is inside our body, how our oxygen and nutrients move around based on our blood, and how our heart is pumping and moving that blood, that connective tissue liquid around in our body. So, of course, our heart, our cardiovascular system, is very important to us. It helps maintain the balance inside our body, our homeostasis. And we need our heart to continue to beat and pump efficiently. And we don't want that to stop even for a few minutes. We also want to think of how we can potentially help our body with its homeostasis and understanding what and how we are affecting it. So, of course, we're going to talk about the heart, we're going to talk about the blood, and we're going to talk about the blood vessels that are moving that blood that our heart is pumping around. The functions or the physiology of our cardiovascular system. There's not that many for this chapter. There's only 3, but as you can imagine, they're extremely important for us to remember. This picture is what's on the bottom of page 633, and it's what's inside our body in regards to our blood. So blood itself is a liquid connective tissue. It's red because it has oxygen to it. So that has the oxygen content is how red it is. But when we look at what our blood actually is composed of, this picture definitely helps us with that. And we also want to look at the different parts of what is here. So we have our plasma, and we have the very center part. If you look, there's a little separation between the yellow plasma and the red part. So there's also a little part of platelets that we have to think about too. So this is just what's inside our blood right now. So the top part is our plasma. So this is the vast majority of our blood itself. So this is a straw-colored liquid that is mostly water. 90% water. The other portions that you are seeing are the leukocytes, the thrombocytes, and the erythrocytes. So we have our liquid blood, but within that we have our plasma and these 3 other things. These are the 3 different types of blood cells. So they're pictured on page 634. And as I mentioned, they're the erythrocytes, which are our red blood cells. So that is transporting oxygen and carbon dioxide. It also contains our hemoglobin, so our iron-based protein that is binding our oxygen and carbon dioxide together so that they can be transported. We have our leukocytes, which are our white blood cells. So this is our body's defense system. So destroying or getting rid of those pathogens or foreign things inside our body that we don't want there. And the other is our thrombocytes. So these are our platelets. So these are fragments which are helping our vessels, if they get damaged, to stop or slow the blood loss. So when you look at the pictures of all of these differences, the erythrocytes, those are being our red blood cells. They have, it looks like the red top to a test tube. The thrombocytes, you can see how they're more fragmented. They have more jaggedness around the edges, so that's why they're trying to stop or slow our blood loss. But then look at those 5 different types of leukocytes, or our white blood cells. So these are the ones that are our body's defense system. So based on what the foreign agent is, or that pathogen inside our body is automatically going to send what it needs to get from that particular leukocyte. So if you've ever heard of somebody having, their white blood count was up, we're looking even deeper to see what that white blood cell is to help us potentially understand why this body is needing this reaction from that particular leukocyte. So you don't have to remember what the 5 different ones are. You just need to be aware of overall the erythrocytes, the leukocytes, the thrombocytes, what they are, what they're doing, so that you can understand what's happening within our cells, or excuse me, our blood, along with our plasma. Probably you've heard of your blood type. Maybe you know it, maybe you don't. So that is called an EBO classification. So it's just classifying what type of protein you have, whether it's present or whether it's absent. So it's an antigen protein. So there's a table on page 636 that goes through that information. Seems almost a little bit more complicated, but what you do need to know is the information that I have typed on the bottom part. You need to know what blood type is the universal recipient. You need to know what blood type is the universal donor. And you need to know what recipient and donor means. So maybe you know your blood type, maybe you don't, whether you contain the antigen one way or the other, but you do need to know those specific things. You don't have to memorize what blood type can match or receive or give from another blood type. Just again, just those overall classifications. And now on to the heart. So this hollow muscular organ that is pumping inside of us, but the heart itself has a sac around it. So it's a pericardium that has an outer layer and an inner layer. So the pictures that you're seeing here on the screen is what's on page 637, and perhaps it's going to help you as we move through what seems to be a complicated process. And if you think it's complicated now, just wait till we talk about how everything is pumping through this organ. So let's start with those heart layers. The epicardium, epi is the outer layer, so it's our fatty connective tissue and where our blood vessels are located. The myocardium, MYO means muscle, so that's the muscle layer. That makes up the majority of the heart wall. And if you look at that picture, you can see how thick that muscle is. The endocardium, is the inner layer. So this is where the heart chambers are, the blood vessels, the valves, which we're going to get to next. So just overall, taking time to maybe highlight in that picture just what we've talked about so far. The bigger parts of the heart is the heart chamber. So the heart is divided into 4 chambers. The atrium is on top. The ventricles are on the bottom. So A comes first, so maybe that'll help you remember. And then we have a right and a left atrium and a right and left ventricle. The right and left are the superior chambers, and the right and left ventricles are the inferior chambers. The valves that are located within those chambers starts on page 636. And there is another picture that's on page 638 that you can look at as well. Some of the valves are easier seen in one versus the other picture, but you can see them in both, just different views of them. So we'll start with what heart valves are. They are opening and closing, just like a valve, to regulate the flow of blood all throughout those chambers and to keep our blood flowing in the same direction. We have valves that are based on the area that they're located. The atrioventricular valve is located between the atria and the ventricles. We have a right atrioventricular valve, which is the tricuspid valve, because it has 3 little pointed flaps on it. That's the cusp itself. And then we have a left atrioventricular valve, which is a bicuspid valve because it has 2 points or 2 cusps on it, or pointed flaps. The bicuspid valve can also be called the mitral valve because it says it looks like a bishop's hat. I mean, okay, but either way, tri and bi are easier prefixes. Tri would mean there's 3 points, bi would mean there's 2 points. The semilunar valve is next. It's located between the ventricles and the aorta. And these valves are semilunar because of the shape of them, kind of like the half moon or half crescent shape that it has. The aortic valve is next, located between the left ventricle and the aorta. The pulmonary valve is the right semilunar valve because it's located between the right ventricle and the right pulmonary trunk. So when these valves, which are regulating the flow of blood and the heart's direction or the direction of the blood, when they open and close, that's what's giving us the sound that we're used to hearing when we hear a heartbeat. They call it a love dub, but you get it. You've heard that heart rate before or heartbeat before. So this picture is the one that I mentioned that's on the top of page 638, that you could see some of the valves located here if you didn't want like the picture on 637. But what I want you to notice about this picture is the arrows. So this is the movement of blood through the heart and how that actually happens. So first, when blood moves through our heart, it creates a cardiac cycle. So that's a sequence of events from one heartbeat to the next heartbeat, and that gives us our heart rate. So how many times that cardiac cycle happens in a minute is our heart rate. Heartbeats can be fast or slow, which are the terms tachycardia and bradycardia. Those are defined on page 636, but tachy and brady are prefixes. Cardia is the root word that always has to do with the heart, so that might help you. In the cardiac cycle, there has to be stages of what's coming in and what's going out. Just like if you're driving down the road, you come to one of those roundabouts, there has to be a directional flow. So when you look at those arrows, we have to maintain what is happening. But in our heart, we have 3 stages, but the weird part is stages 1 and 3 are happening at the same time. So if you want to just look at the picture, follow along, or you can see the definitions of stage 1, 2, and 3 on the bottom of 636 and 637. So in stage 1, the oxygen depleted blood is entering through the right atrium from the bigger valves, from the bigger chambers, which are the superior and inferior vena cava. Not important that you absolutely remember those things, but just know that it's coming, oxygen depleted blood is coming into the right atrium. The right atrium contracts and moves the blood into the right atrioventricular valve or the tricuspid valve, which is in the right ventricle. At the same time, we go to stage 3 because it's happening. Stage 1 and stage 3 happen at the same time. Blood is moving from the left atrium through the left mitral or atrioventricular valve, and it's entering into the left ventricle. The left ventricle is contracting and pushing blood through the semilunar valve, and then the aorta is receiving blood or sending it out into the body. So stage 1 and 3 happening at the same time. Some's coming in, some's going out. And then stage 2, which these are just the parts of a cardiac cycle, the right ventricular is contracting and moving blood through the right semilunar valve into the pulmonary trunk and pulmonary arteries and into the lungs. So this is where the oxygen depleted blood needs to go in order to be re-oxygenated. When it's done, the pulmonary veins are the ones that are going to be transporting that oxygen-rich blood. So that's the difference in the colors between the red and the purplish type coloring there. Oxygen depleted blood is the purple-ish. The red is the oxygen-rich blood. So that might help you remember what is happening. So that is the 3 stages of the cardiac cycle, which is just the movement of blood all throughout the heart. But just like when we're driving down the road and we come to one of those roundabouts, there has to be my foot potentially going on the gas in order to make my car go forward. So that's the conduction system. There's a speed to what all of this is going to happen. And that's being maintained by a particular place in my heart. So this is the heart's conduction system. It's on the bottom of page 637. So this is the SA node. So this is the electrical part of what is happening. We don't need to dive really, really deep into this, but I need you to understand that this SA node is on the top part of the right atrium. So this is where the electrical current is happening. The SA node can misfire, or it cannot do its job, kind of like my car can sometimes be out of whack. It's just not firing right. So the SA node has to generate that nerve impulse in order for my heart to beat correctly. So the SA node, which is the senoatricular node, so SA node is a lot easier, that is the pacemaker. So there is a particular place within my heart that this needs to occur, the electricity, that firing, so you can think of it like as the gas pedal area. How the blood gets out into the rest of our body is through blood vessels. So we just got done talking about the heart, how the blood is flowing through there. Seems very complicated. We talked about blood, what makes up blood. But now we're going to talk about blood vessels. So just these tubes that are all around our body. We have different types of blood vessels. But before we even get to the different types, let's just look at some generalities about blood vessels themselves. So the picture that you're seeing here is what's on page 641, and it's showing just the different layers of a blood vessel. There's an artery and a vein and capillaries. So those are the different types that we have. But all of these, whether it's a vein, an artery, or a capillary, they can expand or contract. So we have vasodilation and vasoconstriction, which are going to change the very center of the vessel. The center part, or the space on the inside, is called the lumen. So when vasodilation happens, that lumen is going to get larger. When vasoconstriction happens, that lumen is going to become smaller. There is two terms for when that happens in a particular area of our body. We have a term that goes along with that. So this is on the bottom of 638. We have hyperemia and ischemia. So hyperemia is when we're increasing that blood flow, so vasodilation has occurred. Ischemia is when the vasoconstriction has occurred and it's gotten smaller, that lumen has gotten smaller. So that is the same for whether it's a vein, an artery, or a capillary. So other than color, and what is the difference between these different types of vessels? So let's look at that next. Arteries, so this is defined on the bottom of 640. These are oxygen-rich blood vessels. So there is some that are a little bit different when they're coming out of the heart, but in general, we think of our arteries being red, they're oxygen-rich. So that pulmonary artery that we talked about when we were talking about the direction of the blood flow within the heart, there is a pulmonary artery which has oxygen-depleted blood going from the heart into the lungs, but all the rest of the arteries are those red, rich color. So when our heart beats, it's pushing or pulsing the blood through our arteries. Blood pressure on the bottom of 640 is what we use to find out the amount of pressure that's in between the blood vessel walls. So how much pressure is that taking? It does list in this book that the average or normal blood pressure is 120/80. Actually, that has been changed, but either way, we know that we have our own normal blood pressure. And when we get into the urinary system, we're going to find out how the kidneys and the adrenal glands are really the ones that are controlling that blood pressure. This is just what we are using as the term to define that reading. So we have arteries. Then let's skip over to veins on the bottom of 641. So veins are the ones that are more bluish because it's the oxygen depleted blood that is moving through these. So arteries, veins, and then capillaries. So in this picture, it's the one that's on the very bottom. Kind of looks like a connecting tube. But this is a very important part of our vessels, because this is where the exchange of gases and nutrients and waste is occurring between the blood and the body cells. So this is our functional unit, the capillaries. We probably don't think of the capillaries as being that important, but they definitely are. This picture, which is from page 640, is showing you the differences between our arteries, our veins, and then look at those capillaries at the very bottom. So there's capillaries in each organ, and that's why they are a very important functional unit. That nutrient exchange is happening there. So just look at how everything is tied together. Every section of our body is bringing blood to and from our heart. It's got to pump it through. Everything has to work in conjunction during that cardiac cycle to make sure that everything is doing what it needs to be doing within our body. On page 643 is this picture that I have up here. So this is showing when our heart is pumping blood all throughout our blood vessels into our lungs. We have that oxygen rich. We need to get rid of that carbon dioxide. The blood not only pumps into our lungs, but it also has a pump out to our body, out to the rest of our body, because there has to be that exchange of the oxygen, nutrients, hormones, and all those kinds of things. So there's two different blood circulation paths that happen. We have the pulmonary circuit and the systemic circuit. So just two different paths. And when you first look at that picture on the bottom of 643, it looks very complicated, but I want to identify that the heart is the very center of that. So we know that it's all centering around that, but then look at the two side parts are the lungs. So if you think of the organs and just what is happening in and out of them, this is going to kind of bring back what's happening inside our heart, and that the blood is flowing in one direction and those valves that are helping it. So knowing all those little parts are actually very important to get to how the blood is pumping around our heart, into our lungs, and around to the rest of our body. So the pulmonary circuit is the one that is replenishing the blood's oxygen supply and eliminating the gaseous waste. So this is more than just carbon dioxide. There's other gaseous waste that we don't need. So the pulmonary circuit is the one that is helping that. I do have listed there the path. It's not hugely important that you remember that. You just need to know what the pulmonary circuit is. The systemic circuit is transporting oxygen, nutrient, hormones out to the rest of the body, but it's also transporting waste so that it can be eliminated out of our body. So the pulmonary is not doing that, but the systemic is. So we have to get rid of all of that waste that my cells, all my trillions of cells have. And there's different systems within the systemic circuit that are helping with that. So we're going to look at just an example of one of them. This picture, which is on the bottom of 644, is the hepatic portal system. So this is the one that is taking blood from parts of our intestinal tract or gastrointestinal tract to the liver, because hepatic means liver, so that it can continue to be processed before the blood is sent back to the heart. So what I want you to notice about this is just where these blue veins are, how they're embedded into each part of our large intestines that you can see there, and maybe the small intestines if you can identify those. But it's just how everything is working together to get rid of the waste, because I don't want all that junk from my cells to go back to my heart. I want to filter it all out. So the hepatic portal system is our kidney that is helping to filter that out. But there is also other systems. This is just one that they have pictured here in the book. So the picture I have here is showing our major arteries branching all off of the one major artery, the aorta. And then we also have pictured there, so the aorta in the center, and then we also have pictured there the major veins that are in our body. No, you don't have to memorize those. You do need to be familiar with the aorta and just what the aorta is for. But if you look at how the aortic arch is, those three top things that are coming out the top part of our aorta, that goes back to, if you look at the pictures on 637 or 638, you can see that aortic arch and how it's going up to our carotid artery in our neck and our subclavian arteries, so around our clavicle or our collarbone area. So that's just where those are reaching up to. But then notice the abdominal aorta. So it goes down through the center of our abdomen, goes down to feed our legs. So that major branch of the aorta, just how everything is stemming off of that. And then for the veins, just look at how all that process, because the veins are the ones that are trying to help bring that oxygen depleted blood back in and get reoxygenated. So just how intricate our bodies are created.